Can you say this word?
No, 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 no.
Right? If you can say that and nobody pushes back, then you own that decision.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Real Agile or BS. I'm Peter Saddington with my wonderful colleague, Bob Hartman from Agile for All. We love answering all of your Agile and Scrum questions. And today is one that's actually been posited to me previously in classes. I'm sure Bob has been asked permutations of this question before. But the simple question that we're going to unpack today is, should we empower teams to make all the decisions? Now, this is a generic and kind of broad terminology kind of idea here. We'll unpack it a little bit. But again, the question is, should we empower teams to make all the decisions? I think we needed to define maybe a framework around that, Bob, so that we can get started. But I'll let you jump in first.
Well, so let me put on my Ken Schwaber hat. And Ken Schwaber would absolutely say, yes, this is real Agile. This is Scrum in a nutshell. This is exactly what you're supposed to do. And I think there are many, Scrum, I don't want to call them zealots, but Scrum advocates, strong advocates for Scrum that would agree with that. The problem is, as I like to say, the Scrum guide is great. It gives you guidance. It's not a Bible. And I also say that it's fantasy land Scrum. So it doesn't exist in the real world as well as we would like. So people try to get as close to it as they can. And this is one of the issues where they run into trouble, is how can they empower teams to make as many decisions as possible effectively? And if we're saying all decisions, I'm going to say real Agile, but doesn't exist. Right. So on the other hand, if we have a really empowered product owner, so somebody who actually can do the backlog to their own liking, can actually meet with users and come up with the requirements, that takes away a lot of decisions, and they're part of the Scrum team. Do we have a team that's truly empowered to make architectural decisions, for example? Some teams can't. They can make decisions on how to implement features, but they can't do the architectural decisions or even the tooling decisions. So are they able to do everything? Can a Scrum Master actually make change in the organization by saying, hey, we're doing this wrong, we need to change that. Can you do that for me? All of those edge cases, I think, are where we get into trouble with the all decisions wording. I like teams to be able to make as many decisions as possible because, decentralized management says push decision making down to the level where the work's being done. I think that's a very 21st century thing. I think people tried it in the 20th century, didn't really know how to do it very well. Some companies phenomenally successful with it, other companies really not. Then you have a company like Zappos that says, let's go to holacracy and just make every decision be everybody's. And, we got all these different permutations. But at the end of the day, agility to me is helping a team recognize their boundaries in the decision making and making all of the decisions within those boundaries, without having to worry about pushback from elsewhere. And I like the boundary to be as big as it can be, but even if the boundary is small, at least the team knows they own something. Pride in work is the number one reason people like their job. Turns out salary and benefits is usually second on the list. So how do we help them take pride in their work? How do we help them have that intrinsic value of work? That to me is what this question really boils down to. Aside from the is it Agile part, I think it's just good business, right? I think it's just a good business will do this as much as humanly possible.
I absolutely agree. This is one of those things where if this type of question comes up from a client or class, I mostly say this is an opportunity for us to talk about working agreements and team norms. Where are those boundaries? And you're absolutely correct here, Bob. The number one thing that gives fulfillment, right, and purpose to individuals within a company is their ability to have that autonomy that you talked about, that their voice actually matters. In many cases, teams don't know where they can say yes and where they can say no. They don't know where those boundaries are or those guardrails are, so that they can speak into the darkness. They can speak into the gray and say, "Hey, we actually know better here. Am I allowed to ask this question? Am I allowed to poke here? Am I allowed to say this or say that?" And I think there's a lot of tension that teams have because they don't have those guardrails. They don't have a framework to operate, and they don't know where they can inject themselves and say, "This is broken. This is a problem. We know how to do this." And we also have to remember that the farther you are away from a problem, the easier the solution becomes. And so obviously for upper echelons of management and the C level, the answers are always quite clear and easy. But the individuals that are on the ground, in the weeds, doing the work, they know what can work best. And we want to expand that out as much as possible because they're the ones that can tell us whether we can or cannot do what the product owner wants. They are the ones that can tell us that there's these great ideas from our stakeholder are great, but our architectural runway and our infrastructure doesn't scale for that. And so we should be able to have those conversations as freely as possible. And I'm in total agreement with you that teams should be able to expand out their ability to speak and have input into as much of the business as possible. I think it's what's really interesting when it comes to this idea of empowering teams to make all the decisions. Absolutely. Can you put on my Ken Schwaber hat here for a second? I always tell people that the Scrum Guide is the ideal. It's the target that we should shoot for. And I think this is actually a very germane and important point, is if we don't know what the target is, we don't know what the ideal is. Right now, we're never going to get to the ideal where we're completely empowered teams and they have all the voice and all the empowerment, all the autonomy to say, this is how we need to do it. This is how we need to execute it. It's just not reality, right? There's hierarchies, there's structures, there's management layers and these types of things. But we want to be able to move as close to the ideal as possible. And that, I think, is really kind of the thrust of this, of the Scrum Guide, is that this is where we would like to be. How can we get there as close as possible within reason? Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think for teams to understand where their boundaries are, I have a little prop. Can you say this word?
No! No.
Right? If you can say that and nobody pushes back, then you own that decision. And so I think pushing the edges of mentally, where would I be able to say no and be comfortable that I was actually the one making the decision or my team was the one making the decision? I think that's really where we find out where those boundaries are. And a lot of teams think the boundaries are really small, when in fact, most organizations want those boundaries to be bigger, but their past behavior hasn't shown that. And so how do we start using different wording? Hey, Peter, that's a good idea, but instead, let's change that to, hey, Peter, that's a good idea. And right, let's be collaborative and build on these things so that we understand that we're all in this together. Just simple wording changes on the part of management and leadership make a huge difference in whether teams feel empowered. I do an exercise in my class that takes a half an hour about something I call the Empowerment Bill of Rights. It's actually one of the daily dose videos that we've done. And it's so simple to empower people much better than we are today. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it's much better than what we do today, to help them understand, here are your boundaries. Here's the expectation. Let's recognize that I'm empowering you, but I'm here as a resource for you if you need it. So all those things become necessary, and people just really aren't setting the model up well. So I think that's why teams don't feel as empowered as they should be, is their mental model from what they're hearing and seeing and learning just isn't aligned with what management and leadership expectations are, because I believe most leaders truly want workers to be empowered, but they're just doing a terrible job of how to do that. So I think I think this all ties together, right?
Absolutely, and I love that you brought this idea up, because, and I could probably speak for you, but at the same time, I don't want to. But I'll tell you, in my experience, I've never met an executive or leader that said, I want to make all the decisions. I know everything. In most cases, if you really get down to the nitty gritty and ask them really great questions, leaders will very, very readily concede the fact that they don't know what's going on at the technical level. They need information from the team. They need feedback from the team. And frankly, if you really get down to the nitty gritty, they'll concede the fact that they just don't know. And so we need to expand those boundaries. We need to say, hey, team, you have a voice. It does matter because you're the ones who know. And we need to have that conversation and maybe even negotiation with leadership around what we think is the best way to do it versus the strategic considerations that are in the leadership on the leadership side. And so absolutely, I think there's often this gray area, this muddy water area where teams, because of, just like you said, past experiences, believe that they cannot speak into those areas. Their voice doesn't matter here, but that's so far from the truth. At the end of the day, if I were to go really dogmatic here, I think most of leadership, when it comes from the technicals of what they're building in their company, they really don't know anything. they're assuming that the product owners know. They're assuming that the product managers have done the right market research, the right market diligence. They're assuming that that's getting fed appropriately and concisely in small chunks to the delivery team. So there's a lot of assumptions that happen from the middle tier of management to executives. And I think it's really important that the whole team, right, the Scrum Master, product owner, developers, this whole unit is able to say, hey, we know what's going on. Let's give you feedback in all these different areas. It matters. It's important for context for the entire organization. Obviously, the more information radiators we create around what we're doing helps with context to make good decisions. So absolutely, I think we're in agreement here when it comes to empowering teams. We want to empower teams to make as many decisions as they possibly can within a framework or some type of guidance that allows them to know where they can speak and where there are constraints. Is that fair, Bob?
Yeah, and I think, just to clarify another point there, Peter, this is the role of a Scrum Master in a nutshell, right? I mean, they can really make a difference in this. And people are always like, well, why do I pay a Scrum Master as a full-time job? All they do is facilitate meetings. No, they don't. They help with issues like this. They help us understand when we're using Scrum effectively, when we're not. They help us understand how to work through issues like this. They can see bad empowerment being done and work with people. They can see stakeholders and others that are breaking the rules and the bonds of trust. They see all of that and can deal with it to help the team make better decisions and help the team be more effective in the future. If you're looking at your Scrum Master as the person who takes notes during meetings, you are so wrong. You're just not giving them the full credit for what they can do and allow them to actually be your advocate for some of this stuff. I think it can make a huge difference.
I absolutely agree. And a thing kind of rose up in my gut here, Bob, is that I haven't seen a lot of great guidance out there in the interwebs around how management can really leverage Scrum Masters really well. I think there's a lot of articles and blogs that have talked about this kind of not super prescriptively, and it's not that we want to create a prescription and say, hey, this management, this is how you need to leverage Scrum Masters, but I think there's such a gray area there. And there's such a chasm there between leadership and how they can truly empower, utilize a Scrum Master really effectively. I think that's probably something that you and I could easily unpack because we've been in this game for so long, and that probably could be a lot of value add out to our customers and our community out there. So I'll leave it there. I think we're all in agreement. We want to empower teams as much as we possibly can. Team norms and working agreements can help establish those guidelines and those rules of engagement, as well as a Scrum Master. That's your job, to be able to break out from the kind of the old world paradigms of communication channels and constraints there, and be able to allow the team to have more autonomy and more say into what and how they do the work. But if you guys out there disagree with us, that's what the comment section is for. And if you don't want to use the comment section, no problem. We have a great site at agileforall.com. You can go to our community site and you can ask us questions. You can let us know whether we're wrong. Obviously, you can share this, tweet it out, thumbs it up, let people know, and join us in the Agile community site, again, at agileforall.com. Thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.